Hello everyone, Ryan here. So for this video, I just wanted to talk about 7 books that I believe can help make someone more self-aware, or rather anyone more self-aware. And of course by self-aware I don't just mean being aware of the fact that you are a living, breathing, conscious human being, though that is a big part of it. Rather by self-aware I also mean being aware of your surroundings, being aware of everything and anything that happens around you and to you, and also being aware of the many things that can influence each of us each and every day, and which then ultimately helps to shape and define our beliefs, our opinions, our ideals. And because whether we acknowledge it or not, it does happen. I mean, it does happen. And we are all occupying the same planet, breathing the same air, and at some point we do have to find some kind of common ground on which to establish a collective, I guess you could say perspective, collective, because we don't have to all agree on everything all the time. But eventually we do have to learn to cooperate with each other. So yeah, and I mean, I guess you could say, rather than self-aware, I mean, because I do believe being self-aware also leads to being socially conscious. And there's nothing wrong with being socially conscious. Eventually, you kind of have to be at least just a little bit socially conscious. So I mean, that's how I feel. So I don't want to ramble on, but I'll just get right into it here. So the first book, which I believe I mentioned before, is Walden and Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. And if you haven't read either of these, I do recommend it. Of course, some editions might have both in one, some, then there's others that are where it's just other editions are just Walden, and then they have Walden and Civil Disobedience separate, but this one has both of them. So essentially, of course, Walden is a non-fiction story, or rather, I guess you could say kind of memoir, also a little bit autobiography. And it's mostly about the time in which Henry David Thoreau decided to live out in the woods in a cabin that he built himself for no more than, I believe, a couple of years. And of course, during this time, the time that he spent in the woods, he, had a lot of very deep, meaningful introspections and insights. And so, though I guess you could say some of it might seem to be a little bit spiritual, maybe overly spiritual in some points, but he does make a lot of good points, and especially the fact that he believes, or rather he believed, but I happen to personally believe that his opinion definitely applies to today's society. He didn't like seeing different technological advancements being introduced into society. Not because he didn't believe that it could help people, but mostly because he saw people starting to rely on all of these different technological advancements. They started to rely on industry in general. And that's when they started to turn away from growing their own crops and building their own homes. And they started to rely on a lot of other people, a lot of other organizations to do it for them. And so yeah, in a lot of ways he was right. Today we are at the point where, none of us, well, it's rare if any of us grow our own crops, or, sew our own clothes, or I'm pretty sure a lot of us don't build our own homes. Granted, there might be a few of us that do, but so in that regard he was right. And then of course Civil disobedience is primarily about the fact that he believed any individual has the right to protest over anything really, or protest over any kind of injustice, because of the fact that usually if none of us protest anything, then eventually more injustice will occur. So, and that's something that I do happen to believe in. So yeah, again, Walden and Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. I definitely recommend it. So the next one is I gotta apologize for the light a little bit here. It's way too cloudy outside, but this is like one of the only few times that I could record this. So next one is The Republic by Plato. And even though I read this once a very long time ago, I finally got my own copy, I would say about a week or so ago. Even though this is a used copy, it's in fairly good condition. But essentially, of course, yes, Plato was a philosopher, but he also believed that in order for anybody to be any kind of leader or any kind of ruler over any group of people, he pretty much believed that said ruler had to be also had to be a philosopher, or at least be versed in philosophy to a certain point. I mean, and to me that doesn't make sense. I'll quickly read the synopsis here. Plato's Republic is widely acknowledged as the cornerstone of Western philosophy, presented in the form of a dialogue between Socrates and three different interlocutors. It is an inquiry into the notion of a perfect community and the ideal individual within it. During the conversation, other questions are raised. What is goodness? What is reality? What is knowledge? The Republic also addresses the purpose of education and the roles of both women and men as guardians of the people. With remarkable lucidity and deft use of allegory, Plato arrives at a depiction of a state bound by harmony and ruled by philosopher kings. Of course, philosopher kings is in quotations. Philosopher kings. So yeah, although I would say I don't really agree with everything that Plato philosophized about, this is still a pretty good starting point, especially if you want to just begin to comprehend the inner workings of any kind of republic, but also any kind of system of government. So, yeah, The Republic by Plato. Okay, so the next one, I believe I've mentioned this before too. In fact, I reviewed it, I don't remember when, a while ago. But it's Utopia by Thomas More. And even though this is a fictional tale, it's still very, very valid. I still believe that a lot of good insight can be gained from this. It's essentially about this fictional island called Utopia, and the people who live within this society on this island, they live in, I guess you could say, harmony, or at least in very some kind of relative harmony, mostly because they've learned to cooperate with each other. They've learned how to not only grow their own food and sew their own clothes, build their own shelters, but at the same time they don't believe in private ownership. They believe in sharing pretty much everything. And at the same time too, if nobody wants to share anything, they're free, they don't have to share anything. But if they don't share anything, then they have to, kind of make up for it in some other way, such as, pitching in with pitching in with the harvest a couple extra weeks or something like that. And of course, it's been a while since I last read this, so I might be kind of foggy on the details, but that's essentially what it's about. And even though it was written some time ago, I think I want to say, I don't know, I think probably I believe, I don't know, late 1600s or 1700s, around that time. But again, I believe it's still perfect. It still very much applies to society today. There's definitely something to be learned from it, in that, you know, we don't have to share everything, but we at least have to eventually agree on sharing some things, in which we already do. When you think about it, when you really think about it, we already do today. I mean, you know, we share the same roads, we drive on the same roads, we share the same public areas, parks and movie theaters, bathrooms, which I mean, maybe obviously is kind of disgusting, but we do share public bathrooms. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, to me it makes sense that, you know, drinking water, for the most part, we share drinking water. So I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess I could go on and on, but if you want to watch my review of Utopia, I'll provide the link to it down below. Again, I definitely recommend reading it. Utopia, Thomas More. So, next book is Gullivers Travels by Jonathan Swift. And I've read this book once before. This is another one that I've started rereading, mostly because I just recently got a used copy of it. And even though this is another fictional tale, it's also mostly a satirical work, in which it critiques and points out the many flaws in different systems of government. Now, granted, at the time that it was written, the primary, I guess you say most popular form of government would have been a monarchy. Of course, monarchy is, you know, back when there was still a lot of kings and queens ruling over entire kingdoms, or what I guess you could also call empires, you know, more than one nation. But I mean, essentially, Gulliver, you know, is this guy who, at first, he stumbles upon this island with these people that are called Lilliputians, I believe. Well, the island, it's Lilliput. And these tiny people, I mean, you can see on the cover here, it depicts the tiny people that they tied him down because they were afraid of what he might be capable of doing. But then he eventually finds out that, you know, they actually have a pretty decent way of life. I guess you could say a pretty decent, what's the word? Alright, even though they might have, they have an elected ruler, I guess you could say, or appointed ruler, everybody within Lilliput, they have a say in what goes on within their society, I guess. I mean, this is another one, of course, I don't remember all the details from it, but I am still rereading it. And then, of course, after that, he stumbles upon another island where there's a bunch of giant people, and people that are like probably like over 20 feet taller than him. And of course, he meets their ruler, their king or queen. One of the things I do remember that I liked most about this story is eventually he meets these horses. It's like they're like a society of horses, but they call themselves like something like Winhams, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but Winhams, and these horses, and they live in this very peaceful kind of society, and they don't believe in violence. They don't believe in causing any kind of unnecessary harm to themselves or to others. At the same time, there's this other race of beings that they call the Yahoos, and it's very interesting because the Yahoos, they're pretty much human beings. I guess you could say they're kind of a representation of a little slightly more archaic human beings. But at the same time, they're also like very much represent modern man at the same time. Well, I mean, if you read it, you know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. It's easy to understand what Jonathan Swift was criticizing. Criticizing the fact that modern man becomes obsessed with the wrong things. We become obsessed with things like materialism, war, greed, ownership. Though I guess that falls under materialism. But yeah, so I mean, all in all, it's definitely worth reading at least once. Once I'm done rereading it, of course I will review it. But again, I do recommend it. Gullivers Travels by Jonathan Swift. Okay, next one is All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque, or Remarque. This is a pretty well-known novel. It's mostly about the reality of war, I guess you could say, what's the word? Well, I don't know. Well, I'll just read the synopsis here. It says, this is a testament of Paul Baumer, or Baume, who enlists with his classmates in the German army of World War I. They become soldiers with youthful enthusiasm, but the world of work, duty, culture, and progress they had been taught breaks into pieces under the first bombardment in the trenches. Through years of vivid horror, Paul holds fast to a single vow: to fight against the principle of hate that meaninglessly pits young men of the same generation, but different uniforms, against each other. If only he can come out of the war alive. So, yeah, there you go. I guess you could say it's mostly about the hypocrisy of war. The fact that it forces so many generations to fight each other, even when each soldier doesn't necessarily have anything against the other soldier. But yeah, it's definitely worth reading at least once. I do recommend it. I'm in the process of rereading this as well, because I've only read it once before. So, but definitely, All Quiet on the Western Front. Next one is one that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, but again, I believe it still applies to society today. Animal Farm by George Orwell, and it's essentially about a bunch of animals on a farm that overthrow their farmer overlord, and they start running the farm for themselves. They pretty much take it upon themselves to run the farm, and in doing so, they also create kind of their own version of, I guess you say, slightly utopian society. But then also to eventually, some of the animals start thinking differently. They start thinking that they deserve a certain amount of privileges, more so than any other animal. And then that's when they just really ultimately end up repeating the many mistakes that we humans have repeated so often, such as getting carried away with power, getting carried away with dictating commands to others, and also punishing those who don't believe the same as we do, or who don't want to carry out whatever commands that we give them, no matter how ludicrous they may seem. And so it's very interesting. I guess you could say it's also very satirical, much like Gulliver's Travels or All Quiet on the Western Front. It points out a lot of flaws, and makes us aware of what to be on the lookout for. So I definitely recommend it. Animal Farm by George Orwell. So the last one is a fairly new book. Also, I guess you could say it is classified. You could consider it to be self-help. It's titled "It Begins with Me: Navigating Your Journey to Personal Freedom" by Michael Blomsterberg. And I believe I've mentioned this before. I won this copy in a Goodreads giveaway, and I like that the author signed it too. So it's signed by Michael Blomsterberg. And even though I tend to stay away from most self-help stuff, this one actually made a lot of sense to me. I will admit, the first time I read it, I wasn't really feeling it, but it was probably because I wasn't really in a self-help state of mind, or I don't know, something like that. But I recently reread it, and it made a lot more sense to me. Mostly because Michael Blomsterberg points out the fact that ultimately we have to learn to know ourselves first. We have to learn to accept ourselves first before we can begin to, well, really do anything else, but especially before we can begin to connect with other people. And also too, he also emphasizes the importance of staying true to who we really are, because at the end of the day, that we have to really know ourselves. In other words, I guess I don't know how else to put it. I have reviewed this before, but I've only done a written review of it. I might post a video review of it at a later time. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. Even though some parts in it do seem very spiritual, it's still worth reading at least once, I'd say. So yeah, It Begins with Me, Michael Blomsterberg. So yeah, so there you go. That's 7 books that I believe can help make anyone more self-aware. Let me know if any of you have read any of these, or if you have any other suggestions for similar books. I'm definitely open to that. Thanks for watching. I hope this video didn't seem a little too long, but oh well. So yeah, there you go. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, until next time, keep it real, keep on rocking, and peace.